The De Luca Grand had 412 rooms, 3 restaurant floors, a private casino, and a switchboard room in the basement that nobody cleaned unless Rosie Hale cleaned it herself. She had been doing this work for 3 years. Night operator, overnight shift. The title meant very little in a building like this one. The building had staff who wore uniforms that communicated availability without servility, and it had, at various points throughout its hierarchy, people employed to be present and unnoticed. Rosie Hale was one of those people. She had a softness to her entire person that the guards and capos and visiting associates read as comfortable and therefore ignorable. She had learned a long time ago that comfortable and ignorable was an asset in a building where the people with the sharpest elbows were the people everyone watched. Nobody watched the night operator, which was why the night operator knew everything. What it actually meant was the person who connected the calls that powerful men needed connected and pretended not to hear. Rosie heard everything. She heard the way a man's breathing changed when he was lying. She heard the difference between a camera feed with real ambient noise and a loop running over silence. She heard the line that rang twice before anyone picked up, which meant someone had screened it first. She heard the particular sound of the switchboard when a call was being recorded somewhere it should not be recorded. The room was old. Panels of plugs and lights that the rest of the building had moved past decades ago. The De Luca family had kept it running not out of nostalgia, but because analog systems were harder to intercept than digital ones, and there were calls in De Luca Grand that needed to be made without leaving a server trail. Rosie sat at the board at 11:17 p.m., and a light came on that had not come on in 3 years. Not one of the main lines, not one of the extension lines. The light belonged to a line that had been sealed off when her sister disappeared, the secondary board, the one she was not supposed to touch. Rosie looked at it for 2 seconds. Then she plugged in. She heard her own voice. Not a close approximation. Not a voice actor doing an impression. Her voice, with the specific rhythm and pitch and cadence she had developed over years of working a job that required her to speak clearly without drawing too much attention, which meant a particular register and a particular pace. She had never heard a recording of herself that sounded exactly like herself. This sounded exactly like herself, which was wrong in a specific, useful way. Because Rosie Hale had a habit. She always inhaled, very slightly, before she said something she did not want to say. Just a small breath in, like bracing. The voice on the line did not inhale. It exhaled before the difficult sentence, the way her sister had always done. Don't let Luca De Luca leave at midnight. She did not move. The voice continued. If you survive the next 43 minutes. Rosie looked at the time-stamped reader. The display showed 0003 tomorrow, 3 minutes past midnight, as if the call was arriving from a point after the event it was warning her about. She said, "Who is this?" A pause. That line has been dead for 3 years. Then why is it calling me with my own voice? Nothing. Then listen to the static. The static in the call had a pattern. She did not know this immediately. She pulled the audio buffer onto the secondary monitor and ran it through the frequency display. A tool the building's IT department didn't know the old switchboard had, because the old switchboard predated the building's IT department. 3 clicks, a gap, two short tones, a breath misaligned with the voice that followed it. She matched the sequence against the room mapping index she had memorized in her first month on the job, because memorizing the room mapping index was the kind of thing that seemed unnecessary until it saved your life. The pattern pointed to the sealed secondary boardroom. She sat back and looked at the frequency display for a moment. In 3 years of working this board, she had developed a particular relationship with patterns. She knew which patterns were the building doing what buildings did. The HVAC system cycling through its overnight protocol, the elevator motors responding to late-night traffic, the kitchen exhaust fans running at reduced speed after the last service. She knew which patterns were people trying to move around a building quietly, which looked different from authorized movement in specific ways that she had spent 3 years cataloging without writing down. And she knew the pattern of someone who had worked this same board before her and understood exactly what the analog system could carry that the digital one could not. Her sister had been methodical. That was the word their mother had used. Not careful, not quiet, methodical. Rosemary built systems. She built them carefully. She maintained them, and she left documentation behind for the people who came after. Sub-basement level. Locked since the night Rosemary Hale disappeared. Rosie looked at the camera feeds. Garage level, floor 40, corridor, lobby. Garage looked normal. Normal image. Normal light. She turned up the gain on the ambient audio for the garage camera. Silence. The garage camera always carried the sound of the ventilation system, an old electric hum that ran continuously because the ducting had not been serviced in 11 years, and the motor had developed a resonance the building maintenance team had logged and never fixed. No hum tonight. The camera was looping. What she was seeing was a recording playing back as live feed. She called the security desk. A guard answered on the second ring. He said everything was fine. He said it in a tone that was slightly too even. The vocal equivalent of a prepared statement, the difference between a person reporting what they had observed and a person reciting what they had been told to say. She called Mara De Luca. Mara De Luca controlled personnel scheduling, the elevator priority system, the guard rotation, and the building's internal logistics. She had held this role for 14 years. She picked up immediately. Rosie said there was an anomaly on the secondary board and a timestamp discrepancy on the garage camera, and she needed to flag a potential issue with Mr. De Luca's scheduled departure. Mara said, "Night operators do not question the boss's movements." Rosie said the camera audio was missing. Mara said, "Then log it and forget it." Rosie said she needed to escalate. Mara said, "You are a switchboard technician. Escalation is not your function." The line went dead. Rosie looked at the board. The secondary line light was still on. She looked at the timestamp again, 0003 tomorrow. She thought about her sister for a moment. The specific quality of thinking about someone who was supposed to be gone, who occupied a space in your mind that should have been closed but had not closed. That remained as a low, continuous signal even 3 years after the building swallowed her. She pulled the employment file for Rosemary Hale. The system took 11 seconds to return the record. Rosemary Hale, night operator, De Luca Grand. Dates of employment. A note? Resigned. Nothing else. No exit interview. No forwarding address. No conversation with HR that Rosie could find in any of the standard documentation fields. She searched for secondary records. The system returned a flag, file archived by administrative order of M. De Luca. She found the intake record for the archived file. Rosemary had filed a report. The report was about camera loops in the garage, an emergency line being forwarded to an empty room, staff transferred off shift and not seen again. A secondary board line that connected to rooms not on the official building diagram. The report had been received. It had been signed as received by Mara De Luca, and the next entry in the file was resigned. Rosie called the secondary board line. She said, "People who choose to disappear do not leave their last call trapped in a wall. A breath, not hers, a breath that moved the wrong way, exhaled first, where Rosie would have inhaled. If you buried her file," Rosie said, "who buried her voice?" Mara's line was still open. Mara heard this. Mara did not respond, which was a response. "Finally," said the voice on the secondary line. Rosie said, "Rosemary." "Not a question," the voice said. "I have been trying to reach this board for 6 weeks." Rosie pressed her palm flat on the console and held it there. "You are alive," she said. "I am alive," Rosemary said. "I have been alive the entire time. I left through the maintenance cable route on the north face of the building. It took me until the 2nd floor before I could breathe without counting seconds." 3 years, Rosie said. "I needed time and distance and documentation that could not be dismissed as the word of a disgraced switchboard operator." Rosemary spoke quickly and with the precision of someone who had rehearsed this call for a very long time. She said, "Luca De Luca leaves the building at midnight every night." She said, "The route is consistent and known." She said, "The garage camera is being looped tonight. The guard rotation has been altered to remove the 2 guards loyal to Luca's personal protection. The car prepared for his departure is not the car he thinks it is, and the elevator on his personal line has been redirected to a floor that takes him 12 seconds farther from security than his standard route." She said, "Multiple capos who report directly to Luca have received calls tonight, placing them at points throughout the city that are not their assigned positions." She said, "This is not an external operation." "Who?" Rosie said. Rosemary was quiet for a moment. "The same person who turned my report into a resignation letter." Rosie said, "Are you saving him or using me to keep him inside long enough for something else to happen?" Rosemary said, "Sometimes the difference depends on who survives. That is not an answer. It is the most honest thing I can tell you right now." Rosie looked at the clock, 11:48. She looked at the camera feeds. She looked at the board. She thought about 3 years of working a job that had swallowed her sister. She thought about a file that said resigned where it should have said something else. She said, "Tell me what you need." Rosemary told her. There was a particular economy to the way her sister spoke that Rosie had forgotten, not brevity for its own sake. The precision of someone who had spent 3 years saying exactly what needed to be said to people who might be listening, and making sure it was audible, but not recordable. She had mapped the camera loops. She had documented the gate patterns. She had tracked the secondary board from outside the building using the maintenance junction on the south wall that connected to the building's analog backbone. The same backbone that fed the switchboard room. Running in the walls like a circulatory system, the building's digital upgrade had never replaced. She had been watching, she had been waiting for the right night. And she had needed Rosie to be the one inside when it happened. 11:56. The private elevator on level 40 began its descent. Rosie watched it on the elevator status board. She keyed into the elevator's internal communication line. She had done this before. Elevator line 2, a direct channel that connected to a small speaker inside the cab, used for maintenance communication when the external contact panel was unavailable. It rang once. Luca De Luca picked up. His voice was the voice of a man who ran a criminal enterprise from the top floor of a building he owned, and had not had a conversation interrupted by a basement technician in the entire time he had occupied that position. He said, "Who gave you this line?" Rosie knew this moment. She had imagined a version of it many times, not as a fantasy, but as a preparation. The way she imagined what she would do if a specific line failed during a high-priority call, or if the building's power dropped during a gate-open sequence. She had prepared the words. She had prepared the brevity. She had not prepared for the quality of attention that came from the other end of the line. The kind of attention that meant the person listening was doing exactly that, nothing else, processing every syllable at the speed of someone who had made consequential decisions under pressure for a very long time. The woman who sounds like me and knows where your dead employees are hidden. A pause long enough to count. "You have 30 seconds, he said. "You get 15, Rosie said. "The garage camera is a loop. The audio is missing. The guard rotation was changed tonight. The 2 guards who travel with you personally have been reassigned to positions across the building. The car in garage bay 3 is not your car. The elevator you are currently in is going to reach a floor that puts you 12 seconds from the nearest security position instead of 3. She let him do the calculation. "Mara," he said. "Mara's system," Rosie said. "Not necessarily Mara with her hands on it tonight, but her architecture, the midnight schedule. Has been running the same way for how long?" Another pause. "Who is she?" he said. "The woman who sounds like you." "My sister," Rosie said. "She filed a report 3 years ago. She said the garage camera looped. She said the emergency line was being redirected to an empty room. She said staff were being transferred off shift and not seen again." Luca said nothing. "Her file says, resigned," Rosie said. "Does that match what you know about her?" Luca was quiet. Rosie watched the elevator status board. The cab was still descending, 4 floors above the garage level. 3. She watched the building's security alert system, which was a secondary display she had rigged to the board's perimeter input, because the original installation had not included it, and she had spent her 2nd month on the job deciding what information she needed that was not being provided to her. The garage override protocol was already primed. She had been priming it since 11:48, not because she was certain, because certainty was not the standard. Her sister had been certain. Her sister had written a complete, accurate, documented report and had been given a resignation letter she never signed. Certainty was not the standard. Preparation was. Mara's voice came onto the building intercom, a general instruction to security. The switchboard operator in the basement was attempting unauthorized intervention in building systems. Mara's voice was level. Her voice was the voice of a woman who had managed 14 years of crises in this building by being the calmest person in the room. "Open the gate," Mara said, on a separate line to Rosie directly. "Open it now, or I will have you removed." From the secondary line, barely audible, "Lock it." Rosie looked at the clock. 11:59. She said, "A locked gate can be a prison or a rescue. Tonight, it is both." She pulled the manual override. The garage gate locked. The building's security system registered an unauthorized override and began generating alerts. Luca's elevator stopped between floors. Rosie said into the elevator line, "You are stopped. You are safe. Do not move until I tell you it is clear." A long silence from the elevator. "Then if you are wrong about this, I know," Rosie said. "If you are wrong about even one detail, I know," she said again. She watched the clock roll over to 12. On the camera, she had patched through to real feed, the maintenance camera on the north garage wall that had not been part of the loop because it was not on the primary security system. She watched what happened to the car in Garage Bay 3. A signal came through the Luca Grand intercom that did not go through the main switchboard. It went through the secondary board, the one sealed after Rosemary disappeared. Rosie had that board open. She heard the command. She recognized the voice. It was not Mara. It was a man she had transferred calls for 18 months. One of Mara's operations administrators. The command was for the gate to open. The gate was locked, and on the secondary feed, the car in Bay 3 ran the engine and waited. It waited for 2 minutes, then it stopped. Rosie looked at the timestamp, 12:02. She keyed into the elevator. "It is over." Luca came to the basement. He did not send someone. He came himself, in the coat he had been wearing when the elevator stopped, and he stood in the doorway of the switchboard room and looked at Rosie Hale behind the old panels and the screens and the tangle of cables she had been living inside for 3 years. He said, "You stopped my car." Rosie said, "No, I stopped your funeral from leaving early." He looked at the secondary board. "That line has been sealed since the night operator who worked this shift before me filed a report about the garage camera and was recorded as resigned the following day," Rosie said. She turned the audio feed on. The command from the operations administrator played back. Luca listened to it. He listened to it a second time. Mara arrived at the basement level. She was accompanied by 2 guards. She looked at Rosie. She looked at the board. She looked at Luca. The night operator intervened in building security protocol without authorization, she said. "This is a termination event. She should be heard," Luca said. Mara stopped. It was a short sentence. It landed like a structural change. For the first time in 3 years of working this board, Rosie felt Luca De Luca look at her as if she was not part of the furniture, keeping his empire lit. He looked at her the way you look at the one wire that had not been cut. "The secondary board," Luca said. "Open it." Mara said, "The secondary board is sealed." "Open it." The secondary board room was 2 doors down the same corridor. Behind the sealed door was a room that had not been officially touched in 3 years, but had clearly been maintained. Clean, functional, equipment that connected to lines not on the official building diagram, and on the table, a recording device. Still warm. Rosie looked at it. She understood. Rosemary had been here tonight, not at a distance. Inside the building, using the maintenance access routes she had mapped 3 years ago, running the secondary board from a room that Mara had sealed specifically to prevent anyone from accessing it. The recording device contained what Rosemary had compiled in 3 years. Patterns of staff disappearances cross-referenced with shift changes authorized by Mara's office. Gauge camera loops cross-referenced with nights when guests or staff were logged as departed, but no departure was registered at the external camera. The operations administrator's communications over 18 months. A complete picture of a system that had been running beneath the surface of Luca Grand for a very long time. Luca looked at it for a long time. Mara said, "This is fabricated." Rosie said, "It is dated. It has audio. It has the building's own timestamp data." She looked at Mara. "You did not fabricate a resignation," she said. "You fabricated a disappearance, and then you gave the disappearance a clean piece of paper to hide behind." Mara looked at Rosie with the expression of a woman, calculating whether there was still a move available. There was not. The operations administrator had been detained at the garage level. The guards who had been reassigned from Luca's personal detail were being recalled. The car in Bay 3 had been identified. Rosie looked at Mara. 14 years of running this building, 14 years of shift schedules and access logs and personnel transfers. 14 years of being the person who made the systems run so smoothly that the man at the top never had to ask how. "Her report said the same things your records say now," Rosie said. 3 years ago. You received it. You could have investigated. She picked up the copy of the intake record she had printed from the personnel archive. Instead, you sealed the board and gave her a resignation letter she never signed. Mara looked at Luca. "You think she saved you because she told you the truth?" she said. "She only told you the part that moved you where she needed you." Luca looked at Rosie. Rosie did not answer, because she did not know if Mara was entirely wrong. Mara did not say anything more. Rosie had not expected her to. Luca gave the order for Mara to be held pending investigation. Not the final order. These things would take time. Would require the council. Would require the kind of process that the De Luca family used for matters that could not be resolved in a basement in the middle of the night. But Mara was separated from the building systems. Her access codes were suspended. Her guards were reassigned. She stood in the corridor of the sub-basement level, and she looked like a woman who had managed 14 years of crises and had finally run out of the particular resource that had made her good at it. The resource was control. She no longer had it. Rosie watched this happen from the doorway of the secondary boardroom. Then she went back to the main switchboard room and sat down at the board she had been operating for 3 years. The secondary board light was still on. She plugged in. "Rosemary." "I heard," Rosemary said. "She is being held. For now, the evidence is on the board. Luca has it." Rosemary was quiet for a moment. "The door on the north side," she said. Rosie understood. The maintenance access route, the one that led out. The one Mara had never found because Mara had never bothered to learn which walls were load-bearing. Rosie looked at the camera that covered the north maintenance corridor. She pulled up the feed. She looked at it for 3 seconds. She thought about a resignation letter that had been filed without a signature. She thought about 3 years of a board line that had been carrying her sister's voice in the walls. She thought about what it meant to say that someone had survived something, and whether survival was the same as being safe, and whether safe was the same as free. Then she minimized the window. She heard the sound of a door, faint through the walls. Then nothing. Luca appeared in the doorway behind her. He had been standing there long enough to understand what she had just done. "You let her go," he said. "I saved your life," Rosie said. "I did not sell my sister with the change." Luca looked at her, not with anger exactly, with the expression of a man who had spent his professional life being the person who made all the decisions and had just been in a room where someone else made one he could not undo. "She has 3 years of compiled evidence," he said. "Yes, which I now don't have, which exists," Rosie said. "What she does with it is hers." Luca was quiet. "What does she want with it?" "The same thing she always wanted," Rosie said. "For the people who disappeared not to have disappeared quietly." The room was very still. Luca looked at the board. "You knew," he said, "before you locked the gate. You knew she had an agenda beyond warning you. Yes, and you locked it anyway. Yes. Because the warning was still true. Yes." He looked at the board for a long moment. "I should tell you that what you did tonight could get you killed," he said. "I know. In this building, with this family, a switchboard operator who locks the gate without authorization and lets an external operative walk out the maintenance corridor is not in a stable position. I know that too. But," he said, and stopped. He looked at the board again. "I finally learned who was listening," he said. "It was not a compliment, exactly. It was a fact, stated by a man who had spent 14 years being managed by someone in this building and had just discovered what that management had actually cost." Rosie said, "That sounds like trust." "No," he said. "It sounds like I finally learned who was listening." He stood in the doorway for another moment. She turned back to the board. The boards she had been working for 3 years were analog and stubborn, and required a specific physical attention that the digital systems in the upper floors did not. You had to be present with them. You had to know where the resistance was. You could not manage them from a distance or through an interface that simplified the information before it reached you. Rosie had been present with them for 3 years. She had been present while Mara's system ran underneath her. She had been present when the secondary line came back to life. She had been present when her sister's voice came through a cable that had been carrying her sister's absence for a very long time. She thought, Rosemary was right that the building needed to be heard. She thought, Rosemary was not entirely right about everything else. She thought, those two things could be true at the same time. He left the basement. Rosie sat at the board. She wrote up the log. Timestamp anomaly on secondary board. Camera loop confirmed, garage level. Manual gate override, 11:59 p.m. She did not write what she had let happen in the maintenance corridor. She did not write Rosemary's name. Some things deserved a record. Some things deserved a head start. The next night, at 11:17, the secondary board light came on again. Rosie plugged in. You kept him inside, Rosemary said. Good. I saved him, Rosie said. Didn't I? A pause. No, Rosie, you saved the wrong person. Rosie looked at the camera feeds. On the floor 40 monitor, Luca walked down a corridor she had not seen him use before. He stopped at a door she had no record of. He opened it with a key he kept inside his coat. The camera caught the interior for half a second before the door closed. A room, a table, a person seated with their back to the camera. Their hands were not free. The door closed. The feed returned to the empty corridor. Rosie stared at the empty corridor for a long time. She had stopped the Viper boss from leaving. She had locked the gate. She had let her sister walk out the same route her sister had used to survive 3 years ago. She had thought the story was about Mara. She had thought the danger was outside, on the midnight road. She had not thought to ask what was already inside. She thought about a man who had spent 14 years building a system that ran people in and out of this building without a trace. She thought about a man who had been secretly meeting someone outside this building every night at midnight, and had not told anyone, including himself, who was keeping the person inside. She thought about a line that had been dead for 3 years, and had just taught her that the switchboard had never been silent. It had been carrying ghosts. It had been carrying sisters. It had been carrying betrayals with perfect timing. And just when Rosie stopped the Viper boss from leaving at midnight, the final call warned her that the most dangerous secret in Luca Grand might still be the man she had kept alive. She looked at the secondary board light. It was still on. She left it connected. Was Rosie right to save Luca at midnight, or did the night operator just keep the most dangerous man in Luca Grand alive long enough to hide another prisoner? Share your answer below and subscribe to Mafia Hearts and Secrets for more dangerous romances hidden inside the underworld's most powerful families.